right, that he might listen to other people. Let me go back to this letter from these former intelligence officials because the top signatories, as we've talked about, are Jim Clapper and John Brennan. John Brennan, who headed the CIA under Obama, and Jim Clapper, who was the director of national intelligence. And what I found striking was that the language in this letter, in which they say that the Hunter emails have the earmarks of a Russian information operation, they're actually very similar to the language that was used in the January 2017 so-called intelligence community assessment that was supposed to be taken as the holy Bible for all Russiagate reporting, that Putin waged the sweeping interference campaign with the aim of electing Trump. So, for example, in both the Biden letter and the so-called intelligence community assessment, they say that Russia's actions here would be, or if this comes from Russia, it would be consistent with Russian objectives and goals. So, even the two, uh, uh, documents, this new letter and this assessment from 4 years ago, just have these parallels. And I'm wondering, is given that Clapper and Brennan, who oversaw the production of this intelligence community assessment of January 2017, given that they're willing to sign on to this new letter accusing Russia of being behind the Hunter emails, even though no one from the Biden camp has disputed the authenticity of a single email, and even though the letter even acknowledges that they have no evidence of Russia being behind this laptop story, doesn't that then raise new questions about the validity and the seriousness of the January 2017 intelligence community assessment that Brennan and Clapper oversaw?
Sure, sure it does. Now, the first answer, of course, is that they feel they're confident in doing this because the mainstream media will hold it, will suppress it. And there's only 13 days left, all right? That gives them the confidence, and that's the big deal. The media is the cornerstone here. Now, getting back to, I'm really glad, Aaron, that you used so-called before intelligence community assessment. As most of your viewers probably already know, the only word that's correct in that title is assessment. And in the intelligence world, assessment means using the swag factor. That's a scientific wild ass guess, okay? Now, intelligence, it wasn't very intelligent. Community? Ah, it wasn't the community. Remember Hillary Clinton and the others got up to 17 intelligence agencies in the interrogation. And she got away with that for 4 months. And finally, Clapper said before the, I guess it was the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he's asked, "What about them? They're all 17. How about that?" And he says, "Well, now, Senator, I should clarify. It wasn't 17. It was only three." And the senator says, "Well, only three?" He said, "Actually, but it was handpicked analysts from those three." Now, Clapper is so dumb that he thought handpicked that'd be a good thing, right? But we all know what handpicked means. You handpick the solution. You handpick the analysts who are going to come to that solution. Now, the interesting thing here is that it looks like John Durham is paying renewed attention to how this thing evolved, because it was a charade. Let me explain. And I've talked to James Clapper.
That's right. You are one of the few people, the few Russiagate skeptics who have actually confronted the people behind Russiagate in person. You question James Clapper, and you also question Adam Schiff.
Yeah. Well, as far as Clapper is concerned, he talked a lot about Russiagate and all this kind of stuff. I challenged him, and he said, "Oh no, the forensics are just incredible. The forensics, what forensics?" The head of CrowdStrike says there aren't any forensics. So, what forensics is he talking about? We have a real deficit in objective analysis of Russia, and let me just briefly explain why. When Bill Casey came in with Ronald Reagan, 1981. Okay, I was there. Okay, he picked Bobby Gates, who actually worked for me as a Russian analyst in the 70s, he picked Bobby Gates because when Casey said, how many Russians are under that rock in Nicaragua? Gates would say, oh, there are 3 or 4. No, there are 5 of them. Right answer.
Is this Robert Gates, the former defense secretary?
That's right, same fellow. Yeah, he became CIA director under the first George Bush. He was a Soviet analyst. Long story short, Casey really liked him because he knew that, just as James Clapper knows, that the Russians are, genetically disposed to be really evil people. Okay, so the long story short, he promoted all these people. He didn't know anything about Russia. For example, John McLaughlin, who became deputy director of the CIA, he didn't know anything about Russia, so they put him in charge of the Russian analysis. Okay, what happens when that all happens? Well, the people who are smelling the best way to get advanced, they know that Russia is just as Jim Clapper described it, just as Bobby Gates described it. And when you get George Tenet, who was a protege of Bobby Gates, in from the White House, well, he'll do whatever Cheney or anybody else wants. And when you get Tenet picking John Brennan, so it's Gates beget Tenet, Tenet beget Brennan in biblical terms. Okay, and Brennan was going to do just about anything that the administration required. Now Clapper, he's just a symptom. Clapper was put in charge of imagery analysis. That's all these satellites and stuff. You get all this. It's not just imagery. It's spectral. It's radar. It's infrared. It's everything comes to this one unit that Clapper was put in charge of before Iraq.
That's right.
And what happened? What happened to all these weapons of mass destruction? How do you find weapons of mass destruction? Well, we got that place saturated with coverage. Did he find any? Well, he apologized later in his book. I called him on this because I thought it was so. I got to this. It was a meeting at Carnegie. When you live in Washington, you go to these things. This is the only time James Clapper appeared in public that I know of, but I went, okay? And I went early and I bought his book. It was really $35 I put out for that book. But then I felt what he says in the book, he says, well, the blame, we were leaning forward because we know that the president wanted to make war on Iraq. He says this in the book, quote, the blame is due to intelligence officers, including me, who were so eager to help the administration make war on Iraq that we found what wasn't really there, period, end quote. What wasn't really there? We found weapons of mass destruction that weren't really there, end quote.
Ray, let me just quote what he said back in 2003 when he was trying to justify the Iraq invasion. So he's then head of the Satellite Imagery Intelligence Agency, and he tells the New York Times that intelligence shows that Saddam, quote, unquestionably moved WMDs out of Iraq into Syria. And Clapper said, quote, I think people below the Saddam Hussein and his son's level saw what was coming and decided the best thing to do was to destroy and disperse.
Well, he disavows that in his book. Okay, he says, "Oh, that was, I shouldn't be talking off the top of my head. That was really a little extreme." So I discredited myself on that. But what I asked him at this meeting, I said, "Well, now that's your record on Iraq. You found what wasn't really there. Now, fast forward to your service under Obama."
My name is Ray McGovern. I'm part of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Thanks for this book. It's very, very interesting. I'd like to refer to the Russian problem, but first, there's an analogy that I see here. You were in charge of imagery analysis before Iraq. Mm-hmm. You confessed to having been shocked that no weapons of mass destruction were found. And then, to your credit, you admit, as you say here,
Oh, this is bad.
that the blame is due to intelligence officers, including me, who were so eager to help the administration make war in Iraq, that we found what wasn't really there. Okay, now fast forward to this time 2 years ago. Your superiors were hell-bent on finding ways to blame Trump's victory on the Russians. Do you think that your efforts were guilty of the same sin here? Do you think that you found a lot of things that weren't really there? Because that's what our conclusion is, especially from the technical end. Yeah. There was no hacking on the DNC. It was a leak, and you know that if you've talked to NSA.
Well, I have talked to NSA a lot, and I also know what we briefed to then President-elect Trump on the 6th of January. And in my mind, I spent a lot of time in the SIGINT business. The forensic evidence was overwhelming about what the Russians had done. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind whatsoever.
And let me just say this, that we have 2 former technical directors from NSA in our movement here, Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. We also have forensics, okay? Now, the president himself, your president, President Obama, said 2 days before he left town, the conclusions of the intelligence community, this is 10 days after you briefed him, with respect to how WikiLeaks got the DNC emails, are inconclusive, end quote. Now, why would he say that if you had said it was conclusive?
I don't know I can't explain what he said or why, but I will tell you that we're pretty sure we know or knew at the time how WikiLeaks got those emails. I'm not going to go into the technical details here about why we believe that.
We are too. It was a leak onto a thumb drive, gotten to Julian Assange. Really simple. If you knew it and the NSA has that information, you have a duty. You have a duty to confess to that, as well as
confess to what?
Confess to the fact that you've been distorting the evidence.
I don't confess to
the Intelligence Committee assessment was without evidence.
Hey, Ray.
I do
Ray,
not confess to that.
Yeah, I don't want us to.
I just simply don't agree with your conclusion.
Well, now we know. The forensics were incredible, all right. There weren't any forensics, and nobody knows this because of the mainstream media. That's the main conclusion of all this. Clapper goes on, what is it, CNN, and people think that he knows some stuff. Well, he knows how to be like what he describes the Russians as, completely deceptive, completely self-justifying, and he's never held accountable for what he did before Iraq. Not to mention what he did during 2016. Now, interestingly enough, during that testimony before the House Intelligence Committee and another testimony, when Clapper was asked under oath, did he see any evidence of Russian collusion with the Trump campaign? He said, no, sir. No. It was only after he left in mid-2017 where he started saying, oh man, my dashboard lights there were so many contacts between the Russians and the Tampa. Oh my God, it was blinking red, my dashboard. Well, give me a break. The guy, well, I have to watch my language here, but it's really interesting that all these 50 or so intelligence officers and national security officials thought that they should sign on under the signature of Jim Clapper on this stupid thing, which has now been contradicted by the Director of National Intelligence, by the FBI. I mean, hello, have they no shame? I guess the answer to that is no.
We're going to leave it there. Ray McGovern is a former longtime CIA officer. He is the co-founder of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Ray, thanks a lot.
You're most welcome.
Well, for years after the 2016 election, former Obama CIA chief John Brennan was unambiguous. Interview after interview, he told us the Steele dossier played no role in the CIA's intelligence assessment of Russian interference in the 2016 election. Brennan, by the way, told Congress this under oath. Now the IG report indicates he was lying. Brennan's statements have attracted the interest of U.S. Attorney John Durham. John Kirikou is interested in what he said because he's a former CIA officer and a whistleblower who went to jail for doing less than John Brennan apparently has done. And what about that point, John? Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
But you, as someone whose life was turned completely upside down, was kind of destroyed for a while, see a guy like Brennan just committing perjury in public and nobody cares. How does that make you feel?
That seems to be what we're seeing now. If the New York Times is to be believed, John Brennan was saying one thing on Capitol Hill and on MSNBC, where he's now a paid talking head, and saying another thing internally to his own people and Jim Comey, who was FBI director at the time. So we know that that John Durham, the U.S. attorney for the state of Connecticut, who's doing this investigation, has now asked for and will receive call logs from John Brennan, emails from John Brennan during the time that he was the CIA director, as well as contemporaneous notes that Brennan took when he was meeting with these other leaders. So what are we looking at here? Are we looking at one of these or many of these process crimes, making a false statement, perjury, conspiracy? That seems to be what John Durham is thinking of. And just a couple of weeks ago, Tucker, John Durham said that his investigation is not an inquiry. It's an investigation, and it's a criminal one.
Brennan would have had to have known this, correct? I mean, he was at the very center of this. For him to say confidently the Steele dossier played no role in the FISA warrants, like just common sense tells you he would likely have known that to be untrue when he said it.
Absolutely, just like he would have known that the Steele dossier began as opposition research. But he wasn't honest about that, and neither was Jim Comey. We know that they lied to the FISA court. We know that they lied multiple times to the FISA court in order to renew the warrant against Carter Page. You know, I think that at that level, with everything being classified, and with their arrogance at the same time, I think that they can just get away with it, that the truth isn't going to come out at the end. And now it looks like it will come out.
It's, you know, I want to, because I love the country and I spent my life here, I want to believe in our justice system, but you know, you see Roger Stone facing, in effect, life in prison.
That's right.
Over lying about much less. You see the whistleblower venerated as a Christ figure. You're a legitimate whistleblower, and you went to jail. Mm-hmm. And you got to sort of wonder, like, actually, is this on the level? I'm sorry to say it.
Well, I was talking about this with my children the other day, and they asked essentially the same question. And I said, you know, when I was growing up, I just always assumed that adults were smarter than kids and that adults were fair because they were adults. And we've all come to realize that that's just simply not true. People have political axes to grind. Sometimes karma is a real thing, and sometimes there is justice in the end. Perhaps this will be one of those times.
I think, and I have no inside information, unlike John Brennan. I don't have a top secret security clearance, but I think karma's coming for him.
It's coming.
I think that's right. John, great to see you tonight.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Tonight, we know the President of the United States has no facts. No facts to back up his startling allegation that the former President of the United States, President Obama, wiretapped him in Trump Tower during the campaign. Keeping him honest, we know this tonight because bipartisan members of the Senate Intelligence Committee say they've seen no evidence that President Obama ordered Donald Trump's phones tapped during the campaign. We know this because House Speaker Paul Ryan also says he's seen no evidence. Now, remember, the president asked Congress to investigate, and the House and Senate Intelligence Committees have been doing just that for the last dozen days. We know the president has no facts to back up his early morning Saturday tweet storm because in today's White House briefing, Press Secretary Sean Spicer read a long list of media reports that he seemed to believe back up the president's claims. Media reports: Sean Hannity, Judge Napolitano, Heat Street, the New York Times, the very paper the president of the United States has consistently referred to as failing and fake.
Sean Hannity went on Fox to say Judge Andrew Napolitano made the following statement. On November 11th, 2016, days after the election, Heat Street reported. January 19th, the New York Times reported.
Well, we know the president has no facts because he himself was on Fox News last night and finally explained where he got the alleged information that led him to tweet the unsubstantiated allegations against the former president. Watch.
I've been reading about things. I read in, I think it was January 20th, a New York Times article where they were talking about wiretapping. There was an article, I think they used that exact term. I read other things. I watched your friend Bret Baier the day previous where he was talking about certain very complex sets of things happening and wiretapping. I said, wait a minute, there's a lot of wiretapping being talked about. I've been seeing a lot of things.
The president on Fox last night. He's been seeing a lot of things, he says. He read a report in the New York Times. He heard Bret Baier say something. A lot of wiretapping being talked about, he says there. Now we know. The thing is, the report in the New York Times the president seems to be talking about, it does not say anything about President Obama ordering a wiretap. We've actually interviewed the New York Times reporter who wrote the article, and we're going to do it again tonight. In a minute, you can hear him for yourself. As for Bret Baier, whose work I certainly respect, based on Sean Spicer's comments today, we believe the president is referring to Bret's show on March 3rd, the night before the president tweeted. That show does not cite any evidence of wiretapping. Instead, it appears to refer to other unspecified reports, none of which, again, say anything about former President Obama wiretapping President Trump. Let's remember, before sending those tweets attacking the former president, President Trump could have picked up a phone. He could have called the FBI, the CIA, his director of national intelligence, could have just asked for the information. He didn't. There was something else the president said in that Fox interview that's similar to something he said before. In the world of television, it's what we call a tease. Listen.
But wiretap covers a lot of different things. I think you're going to find some very interesting items coming to the forefront over the next 2 weeks.
That's the tease. Basically, it's stay tuned because there's something very interesting coming up. Now, the president has done this before, most notably as a citizen when he used to talk about President Obama's citizenship.
Right now, I have some real doubts. I have people that actually have been studying it, and they cannot believe what they're finding.
You have people now down there searching, I mean, in Hawaii?
Absolutely, and they cannot believe what they're finding.
By the way, the payoff for that tease, that never came. In fact, there has never been any evidence at all that then Citizen Trump actually had people down in Hawaii searching for information. The time when he claimed he did, we actually did have people down in Hawaii searching for information, interviewing all the people somebody would interview for information, and none of those people we interviewed ever reported being approached by anyone working for then citizen Donald Trump.
Joining me now, Fox News senior political analyst Brit Hume. Brit, welcome. Good to have you with us tonight. It is stunning to watch how far out John Brennan, as the former CIA director, was willing to go before Mueller's report was finished.
Yeah, and every word he spoke during this whole period carried the sort of the implicit sense that he, as you know, the former CIA chief, was somebody who was in the know, who had some special knowledge, and who should be taken seriously. And boy, was he by certain news outlets, and it turns out he was utterly and completely wrong. From the get-go, he was wrong. He misread the whole situation, and he led other, thankfully not our news organizations, but many others down a path toward a dead end. And that is where this has ended up. I'm glad to hear him say that he got it wrong, but it's too little too late in his case, in my view.
This is a tweet that he put out today. While the Trump campaign engagements with the Russians were highly inappropriate, we need to accept Special Counsel Mueller's finding that evidence of criminality was not established. And he did, as you say, Britt. He said he's one of the few who was speaking the way he was speaking, who says that he's glad to hear that the investigation cleared the American president of any of this kind of nefarious entanglement.
Yeah, a lot of other media have gone to their new corner to defend themselves now, and the new line seems to be is, hey, what did you want us to do? Not cover the story? It was a big story, and it was an important story, and we were just reporters covering the story. That's what Jeff Zucker was saying over at CNN. You heard that from Margaret Sullivan in the Washington Post and a number of others. And the trouble with it is that misses the entire point. Yes, there were some of the reporting that was done was bad. There were a number of bad stories. We had CNN got caught out a couple of times. We had the Daily Beast saying Mueller is telling us that he's got Trump on collusion. The list of bad stories is fairly long. But beyond that, it wasn't just that they were covering a story. It was the sheer volume of the coverage, the sheer weight given to it. Every little turn and detail in the story conveyed the unmistakable sense that this was going somewhere and it was going to unearth something very serious about our president and his campaign. That it was bound to turn out that way. You couldn't escape it. It was everywhere. It was all around you. And it wasn't just the news columns. It was the editorial pages. It was the commentators on television and in print. And they were nearly all pointing in the same direction in the mainstream media, and they got it wrong, completely wrong.
Here's Joe Scarborough, who is one of those who was listening to John Brennan, and it strikes me as you're talking, Britt, that he was a person of great authority. He was the former head of the CIA,
right?
And he was telling all of them every single day that with sort of a twinkle in his eye, look, I know what's going on here, folks. So you can come along this ride with me, and you will not be disappointed. Here's Joe Scarborough.
So save your breath, all right? We're not going to divert our eyes. This president lies more than any other president in the United States. We're not going to divert our eyes. Damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead, follow the story where it leads us.
Well, I'm all for following the story where it leads you, as long as you're leading it in the right direction. It led, in this case, it led to a dead end. I don't know what he's so proud of and so defiant about. I mean, wasn't his program one of the ones which was leading the charge on this, where John Brennan had an audience many times? I think so. And when the White House put out that notice yesterday suggesting to producers that you not put some of these people who'd gotten it so wrong so often on all the time, I don't think we should take our booking instructions from the White House, but the list that the people that they mentioned there were people who had got it wrong and over again. And and it might not be a bad idea for journalists who are worried about what happened here to say, well, maybe we shouldn't listen to these people in the future. Maybe we shouldn't have them on so much. Not because the White House says it, but because of the record they composed.
There was a piece in the New York Times today by David Brooks, and he was saying that he felt like people like Beto O'Rourke and John Brennan owe the president a public apology. If you call someone a traitor and it turns out that you lacked evidence for that charge, then the only decent thing to do is apologize. You think he'll be waiting a long time?
Oh, I think, well, the rate this is going, I certainly think so. Although you're beginning to hear from certain seasoned politicians and even some liberal journals the idea is, come on, folks, this is a dead horse. Stop beating it, particularly to Democratic politicians. Stop beating it. Move on to things that people care more about, because, you got an election coming up and you want to have something to run on beyond an investigation that turned up essentially nothing.
Ray, you compared the faulty intelligence used to justify the U.S. invasion of Iraq with the questionable intelligence now being used to justify aggression against Russia and even RT itself. So what is the big lesson here for the American people?
You can't trust your government is really the key. Yeah. Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say, Bill.
I'm sorry.
The question really here, no. What I would say is that when you have people like John Brennan and James Clapper, who played a distinctive role in disguising the evidence that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and then it participated in the torture and the surveillance and all this other stuff, when you have them on the mainstream media channels saying, oh, watch out, the Russians are after us again, and Clapper saying, the Russians are almost genetically determined to be really bad actors. Well, that's the level of intelligence, in that sense, intelligence you have in the intelligence agencies. And unless you clean out that strata of nincompoops and also careerists, then the poor people who are trying to do an honest job in the bowels of these agencies will never see light.
Ray and Bill, I want to address this next question to you both. RT America, it's been forced to register as a foreign agent under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or called FARA. So why do you feel RT is being singled out for the state censorship, and what does this mean for the First Amendment? Bill, you can go ahead and answer first.
Well, I think it's just it's a slap at the First Amendment. I mean, we here in America, we're always proud of having free speech, and meaning that we weren't going to suppress any kind of comments by anybody, even if we didn't like them. That was the whole fundamental principle of the First Amendment. Well, now this is pretty much a slap in the face. I mean, if we're going to have TV stations like RT, who are funded by the Russians, why aren't we going to force BBC or other countries, TV stations that are funded by countries, to register also? I mean, we have no consistency in this, except we're selectively suppressing any kind of speech. And that, to me, is a direct violation of our First Amendment in the Constitution.
Ray, we have about a minute left. You can go ahead and get the final word.
Well, thanks. No, I just cite this program here. Bill, if you say things like that, you will never be let on the what's called the mainstream media, nor will I. Do Americans deserve to hear what we have to say? Well, our combined experience in the intelligence world is something like 50 years or more. Now, one thing I'd just point out is distinctive about RT. I have to admit this, okay? And that is this, that RT has never asked me for a pre-interview interview. Now, CBS, ABC, NBC, Al Jazeera, they all say, can we figure out what you're going to say, Mr. McGovern? Would you tell us what you're going to say? In other words, and sometimes BBC said, oh, we don't need to hear that. We have somebody else, okay? RT has never asked me, what's your gloss on this? What would you say about this? All they do is say, here's the link, Mr. McGovern. We know you might know something about it. Please come on. That's distinctive, and that's why I'd rejoice in being asked to at least talk to the people who are smart enough to watch RT.
All right, thank you both. We're going to leave it right there. That's Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst, and Bill Binney, NSA whistleblower. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Glenn Greenwald has thought a lot about that question. Greenwald is a traditional leftist. He's committed above all to forcing transparency on people who hold power. Years ago, Greenwald co-founded a news site called The Intercept. Today, he resigned. In a statement, Greenwald explained why. Quote, "The Intercept's editors, in violation of my contractual right of editorial freedom, censored an article I wrote this week, refusing to publish it unless I removed all sections critical of Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden, the candidate vehemently supported by all New York-based Intercept editors involved in this effort at suppression." And he went on. Greenwald's full statement is up tonight at an internet platform called Substack, which is not yet censored. No matter who you plan to vote for next week, we recommend that you read it. Glenn Greenwald joins us tonight. Glenn, thanks so much for coming on. The idea of you resigning from a news organization you helped found is stunning. Tell us why you did.
Well, the news organization that I co-created was in 2013 at the height of the Snowden reporting. I left The Guardian to do it because I was seeing that there were a lot of constraints imposed on journalism and our ability to report freely against governments, against power centers, against all kinds of institutions that wield authority. And the premise of the news outlet, the core overarching premise, the reason it was created was to ensure that journalists would always have complete journalistic independence and editorial freedom, never have to pull punches journalistically or pay homage to pieties because of the preferences, the partisan or ideological preferences of editors or of anybody else. That was the core founding idea and vision. And then that is what makes it so amazing that at the very outlet that I co-created, that was built on my reputation, my credibility, my journalistic accomplishments, then tried to intervene to censor me 6 days before an election because I wanted to publish reporting and analysis about the evidence that raises serious questions about the conduct of the candidate that all of the editors at that outlet vehemently and enthusiastically support.
I would imagine that some of our viewers don't read The Intercept. You live outside our country, which is one of the reasons I think you say what you think is true. Tell us what this portends for the future here in the United States.
So The Intercept was actually, for a while, a unique publication, and I think the vision I just described is one reason, but another was that it was intended, above all else, to be highly skeptical of the claims of intelligence agencies. At the time when we were doing the reporting, the attacks were coming from the NSA, the CIA, the deep state against me, against my source, Edward Snowden, and against the reporting. And we knew they were lying constantly and disseminating propaganda in a very powerful way. So we set out to say, we're going to investigate them. We're going to be skeptical of them, are going to subject their assertions to critical scrutiny. And I am so embarrassed and angered that the media outlet that I created, along with 2 other excellent journalists, to do that, the only article it published about all of these documents that have emerged about Joe Biden, other than a column of mine where I denounced Facebook and Twitter for censoring it, was an article that made reference in passing to those documents very snidely and dismissively to say that no one should pay attention to it because it was Russian disinformation, and it cited a letter from John Brennan, James Clapper, Mike Hayden, and the rest of the goons from the CIA and the intelligence community asserting it. And worse still, that letter said, we have no evidence that Russia's involved in any of this. The Intercept omitted that phrase, simply cited that letter to try and encourage people to ignore this evidence on the grounds that Russia had manufactured it and that the evidence was fabricated, even though there's never been any evidence for that's been true. And everything since has disproven it, showing Russia was not involved in any of this, and nobody, certainly not even Joe Biden, disputes that these emails and other text messages are completely real and authentic.
It's horrifying. So what you're watching is agencies of the U.S. government turning their awesome and unconstrained powers against the American population.
This is the real story of the last 4 years of the Trump administration, which is that for a long time on the left, there was a healthy skepticism of the CIA.
Yes, there was.
There was a lot of anti-war activism in the Bush and Cheney years. That has all disappeared. And the reason it's disappeared is because the CIA, from the very first days of the Trump administration, even before he was inaugurated, devoted themselves to sabotaging the administration because Donald Trump questioned just a few of their pieties. And that can't be done in Washington. Whoever does that must be destroyed. And so the CIA and the deep state operatives became heroes of the liberal left, the people who support the Democratic Party. They're now in a full union with the neocons, the Bush Cheney operatives, the CIA, Silicon Valley, and Wall Street. That is the union of power, along with mainstream media outlets that are fully behind the Democratic Party, which is likely to at least take over one branch of government, if not all of them, in the coming election. And that is a very alarming proposition because they're authoritarian, they believe in censorship, and they believe in suppression of information that exposes them in any kind of a critical light.
For a U.S. government agency to try and disseminate propaganda within the United States, I mean, is there any clearer attack on democracy than that?
So when we were doing the Snowden reporting, one of the things that induced Edward Snowden to come forward as someone who had worked in the CIA and the NSA was his anger and horror that the tools of the NSA had been turned on the American people. They're supposed to spy on foreign adversary governments, but they weren't. They were collecting our phone records. Same with the CIA. They're trained disinformation agents. That's what they do. They lie for a living. But they're supposed to do that in other countries where we want to induce some sort of change, overthrow a government, topple a regime, whatever quote-unquote interference the U.S. government wants to do, the way we're also upset that Russia did in 2016. That's what they're trained to do. The law, though, and the obvious foundational prohibition on having a security state, a national security state after World War II, was it was never supposed to be turned domestically. They weren't supposed to be involved in our politics or disseminating propaganda. Go turn on any of those other cable networks or pick up the op-ed page of any of the biggest newspapers, and all you'll see are ex-members of the CIA, the DOJ, the FBI, the NSA, telling Americans what they ought to believe. They've infiltrated the means of communication domestically. They do it through leaks. They do it through clandestine operations and through lies. They propagandize the American people in a way that is incredibly dangerous no matter what your ideology is.
I totally agree. And I'm ashamed of the times that I made apologies for those agencies or this behavior. I really am. You are telling the truth. That's really clear. Glenn Greenwald, congratulations on getting out of there. Good to see you.
Thank you, Tucker. Appreciate it.
But you could make a whole movie on the Russiagate hoax. It's all documented.
There was an illusion being created using the most awesome tools and the greatest tricks that the American intelligence community had learned to use against our enemies. Now it was being deployed against the American people and our president.
This is the biggest political scandal in modern history, which makes Watergate look like a tiff.
The FBI director has no credibility.
The left used to not trust the FBI, and now they love them.
If this can happen to General Michael T. Flynn, imagine what they do to anybody who has a single strike against them.
35 Russian diplomats in the U.S. expelled.
The prosecution of General Flynn wasn't a pursuit of criminal activity, it was a setup
Flynn actually had details. So he was talking about going after people's budgets. They were terrified.
Media didn't start as neutral. Media hasn't been neutral all its life.
The two faces of Hillary Clinton are coming out. The fact through WikiLeaks that she says one thing and
oh no. They worked hand in glove with Comey to try to delegitimize Trump. They were not there to tell the truth.
A political dirty trick is being carried out by our intelligence community.
Honestly, none of us really know, sort of holistically, what to think about this dossier.
They went into Congress. They said, there's nothing here. Doesn't matter. We'll keep going with FISA, we'll keep going with the investigation, and more importantly, we will go on TV day in and day out and lie to the American people to their face, and nothing's gonna happen to us.
The nation and all of our freedoms hang by a thread, and the military apparatus of this country is about to be handed over to scum who are beholden to scum, Russian scum.
We had not one person claim that they had or had seen evidence of Trump colluding with the Russians.
Devin Nunes was the hero in the forest. He was alone, he was mocked, he was attacked.
Devin Nunes was subject to such scorn for saying the conclusions that we brought forth in that report, which all proved to be true.
Russiagate was a false story.
To target their political opposition.
To carry out their insurance policies.
I believe this is a conspiracy.
These guys have perpetrated the greatest crime against the American people ever seen. It was a coup d'etat.
This is how sick and twisted these people are.
I recently confirmed that on numerous occasions, the intelligence community incidentally collected information about U.S. citizens involved in the Trump transition.
It was shocking to see some of the overclassification that was done to hide either corruption or abuse of authority and just to make sure certain agencies didn't look bad.
We have a peaceful transition of power process. That's not what happened. There were more meetings, there were more leaks, there were more attacks.
The thing that they were investigating the Trump campaign for is what they themselves were doing. Not just the Democratic Party and their operatives, but also the FBI.
If I were writing about the time frame that we lived in and that we're living in now, I would say it wasn't supposed to happen. They weren't supposed to know.
The entire time this was going on, they thought this was going to be what sunk the Donald Trump presidency. And they were just looking for the golden goose, and they still haven't found it because it doesn't exist.